everyone. This is Ashley Ellenboss with Sky House Herb School and Apothecary. And today I am joined by Michelle Manassah, and we're going to be talking about burnout, which is, I think, a really a topic that a lot of people have on their minds, and a lot of people are likely curious about what they can do to support themselves through it. So, welcome, Michelle. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Ashley. It's really great. I'm really excited about this conversation we're going to have.
And I love that you are, you're a mom like me and you're juggling so many things. Right now, you've got COVID in your house and you've got like meetings and clients. And, I think as, woman to woman, mother to mother, it's just so nice to have conversations. I think that highlight how we also manage our own lives and our own stress. And you've done a lot of extensive research and training on this particular topic. So I think for our listeners today, you're going to be hearing from someone who's lived it and worked through it and now has a thriving business helping other people do this work. So yeah, I think it's going to be a really lively discussion, and I'm so glad you're here.
So thank you. Thank you so much.
So I want to give you all a little bit of a background on Michelle and her work. So Michelle is the founder and the leadership coach behind Pull the Focus. Michelle has worked in media for over 20 years, and 15 of those years in cable television. She has managed large accounts and has directed media teams, bringing out the best in each person and creating meaningful and cost-effective strategies for storytelling. Michelle works mainly in the executive sphere, supporting and coaching teams and individuals, helping them find their unique gifts and calling, and supporting them in the process of living their life at the pace and the velocity they have always envisioned for themselves. When Michelle's not advocating for working parents, empowering women leaders, or managing cable TV budgets, you can find her whipping up gourmet dinners for her husband and her darling young daughters. So you can hear from this, she has, a lot of experience, I think, both as a working woman and now as a working mom. And we wear a lot of hats these days, especially for those of us who have chosen to have families and careers. But even, people that don't have children, maybe they're managing the care of their elderly parents or, their home. I mean, gosh, keeping up a home is in itself, it's a job. It's a full-time job. So, I'm so excited to have you talk about this. And, it's interesting when I was sitting down to think about this topic of burnout, I was like, when did I first start hearing of this word? And I don't know. I mean, I think we're around the same age, but for me, I remember first hearing about burnout as something that was like, what would happen to people if they smoked too much pot and got lazy and they just like ate food all day and they were people who lived on the fringe of society who were not really engaged in the world. They were burnt out and tuned out. But that's not the way that we use this word anymore. So tell us, what is the burnout you're talking about? And who are the people that are getting burned out these days?
It's a really great question. And I think what's so interesting about that, totally agree with you. And I think the word burnout feels like a newer word, but actually it was first coined in 1975 by Herbert Freudenberger. He defined it by three components that I think are really sort of impactful when we're thinking about what burnout actually encompasses. So the first one was emotional exhaustion. The second was depersonalization. And the third is a decreased sense of accomplishment. And those three things for me really do totally embody what I think of as burnout. So when you think about emotional exhaustion, it's really that fatigue that comes when you're caring too much or for too long. The depersonalization is when you have just a total depletion of empathy, of that caring and compassion. And then the decreased sense of accomplishment is really when you have like an unconquerable sense of futility. You're feeling like nothing that you're doing is continuing to make a difference, and you're just sort of spinning your wheels, is how I think about that. So that is sort of the initial definition of burnout. And I think that it still lives on today, this many years later. And when I think about the populations that I think of as burning out right now, what my mind goes to first are really working moms in general, and then caregivers. And I think really just employees in a lot of different ways get burned out. We are really in so much more of a 24/7 society, probably even then when that term was coined in 1975. I mean, definitely even more than that then. And I think those exterior stressors in our lives just continue to add to burnout.
Yeah. So those are interesting defining terms. Now, is it possible to kind of cycle through them? Like, do you have to have all three to qualify for burnout? Or could you like, I'm just thinking, in a day, it might be, I become completely emotionally, despondent, right? Like, so, how do these fit? Like, can you have different of each of these show up at different parts in the day or at different weeks or different months, and can it still be pointing us to this idea of burnout?
I think that it could be pointing to um, sort of a general overwhelm. I think when you're really compounding these experiences and when the stressors, both internal and external, so external meaning the things that are, bothering you in your outside life, and then the internal stressors, that sort of like rumination or, some kind of like body ailment that might be an internal stressor. When those are really compounded, and that you are just being wound up by stress cycles. So stressors are the outside, stress cycles. Stress is what's happening on the inside. It's the neurological and the physiological effects that are happening in the body. When you're going through that experience over and over and over again, and you're not actually releasing anything that's being wound up in you, then that is what is really kind of culminating as burnout.
I see. So it's all of those happening again and again over time that
Yep.
creates that, yeah, that state of burnout.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And what is the cause? Like, what do we think is causing this? Why is it so widespread? I mean, you mentioned a little bit about, we have more responsibility, but is there anything you've seen in your years of practice and studying this, as to why this is?
I think that it's, I think that stressors and how the body responds to stress is has always been there. That the way that we were designed and built means that we have external stressors that affect our internal body responses, and that historically we found ways to physically release that stress within the body. And I think the more compounded the sort of technology and our busy lifestyles take us away from really having as kind of our daily routine to be able to release those stress cycles, um, that we're just continuing to add more opportunities to burn out. And I think that, the stress levels have always been there. Um, it feels like we are bombarded, though, so much more with opportunities for stressors to hit our sort of every moment. And I think, there's a very distinct difference between being chased by a tiger and getting a really annoying email from a coworker, right? The fact of the matter, though, is that I think the way that we are perceiving lots and lots of really annoying emails from coworkers throughout our day, and that seems like kind of a, innocuous sort of event that might be happening. But the fact of the matter is that compounded over time, lots of those happening throughout the day that we're not actually releasing are just building up and causing us to feel really, really stressed out.
Yeah, the compounding is such a great image, this sort of the building up, the piling on. And, I know that you've done some workshops with women where you do like rage releasing workshops. And
Yeah.
it's like, I do wonder that it's like in our society, we don't really have rituals for like moving through different phases of life. Um, And, with COVID, we've been kind of locked down. And so, a lot of physical activities, group activities, social activities, like going out and dancing and, just having like big, even like weddings were kind of canceled for a while. We don't have these ways to just really, yeah, kind of unload ourselves and just kind of have fun, have fun. And so, I know you had mentioned that this was a topic that you really started getting interested in during the pandemic. Can you tell us a little bit more? Like, why was the pandemic for you? Maybe the straw that broke the camel's back, and or like that. Was it kind of piling on for you as well during that time?
Yeah, I think it totally was. I think so. At the start of the pandemic, I had a 5-year-old and a 20-month-old. And so little kids, not yet really in school, daycare shut down overnight, like lots of people, and a full-time job that was really demanding. And, my husband's also full-time job was also very demanding. And so what we really encountered at that time was, just trying to keep as many plates spinning in our house as possible while managing the anxiety of what we didn't know in the pandemic, and all of the concerns of trying to keep everybody, in our household safe, and our community, and all of those sort of things while everything shuttered overnight. I think what I realized through that process was that I was already exhausted and tired and overwhelmed by having 2 little kids, and a demanding job. And so the layering on of the pandemic really just kind of exacerbated everything. And I spent a long time really just in survival mode. And I think it was probably about 10 months in where I looked up one day and realized that I couldn't solve the dysfunction that was around me as the pandemic, by just continuing to do the same thing over and over again. And I'm really grateful that that sort of thought came to me that I needed to find something else. And so, what I ended up doing I started to work with a coach, and really was able to invest in myself in a way that I had never done before. And what I think is important about that was that it was something I did during the pandemic, but that um, experience could have been so valuable at any point in time in my life. And I think that it's really something that when a person takes that sort of shift to invest in themselves, both time and financially, um, lots of really amazing things can happen from that. And through that experience, I actually leaned into learning something new. And so I joke a lot in a lot of ways that my cure to my pandemic working mom burnout was actually to add one more thing, which was to learn a whole new skill set and a whole lot about topics that were super relevant to me and that I was seeing over and over again in my community.
Oh, wonderful. And what did you do? So you said you saw a coach, so you
Mhm,
actually became mentored by a coach.
mhm.
And then how did you get so and now you're a coach. So
Yep.
what was the process? Like what did you do to become a coach? What did you study and how did you do
Yeah.
that?
So when I started working with a coach, I realized that I'd actually had a dream of being a coach for a long time. I just had never really allowed myself to map out what that would encounter. And obviously, through the process of working with a coach, she challenged me sort of almost immediately to explore it. And so we went through coach training. I went through one of the premier schools in the world, the Coactive Training Institute, and everything was virtual because we weren't leaving our houses still during that process. And so I got to meet people all over the world, just like this on Zoom, which was really amazing. And I had added some additional training as well. So I also trained under an amazing coach and author, Tara Moore, in a really fabulous program based on her book, Playing Big, that's all about supporting and empowering women. And I've been doing a significant amount of my own learning. So the more that I think about kind of my own, topics and issues and things like that, that sort of keep me up at night, how I can explore those, and then, recognizing them in my community to be able to help other people.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's, I remember there's a yoga teacher, Sean Korn, who is pretty well known for her program, Yoga Off the Mat, or Off the Mat and Into the World, I think it's called. And, she says, if you want to know your calling in life or your purpose, look for your own deepest wound.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
totally.
And
Yeah.
so, it's like when we hit those bottoms in life and we're like, what the heck? Like, that can be a place where as you start to heal and grow and learn from that, very organically, it's amazing how that place can be such a place of service and such an offering. So I love that. I love that that happened for you. And, and in the executive sphere too, because, I think, that's a very unique place and place and skill set that you have to help people who are probably more type A than the laid back, type of women, who probably could use this coaching even more. And it's nice. I love that you said that you added one more thing, because we often think
Mhm.
that, oh no, I can't add, if I'm already burned out, I can't add one more
Yeah.
thing. I've got to take something off. So that's kind of an interesting uh, kind of turn in that perspective. Um, so so now here's maybe a little bit of a silly question about burnout. We talked about this in the beginning, but how does a person know if they're burned out? Like maybe if those three things are like, well, I'm not sure if I'm emotionally checked out, or I can't, self-resource. So how do we know? How do we know if we're experiencing burnout?
So I think that the way that, many people would know that they're experiencing burnout is really just truly feeling overwhelmed and um, unable to focus on kind of anything. I think about it a lot when I describe the way that I was feeling when I felt sort of my peak burnout, was that I had like a ping pong ball that was bouncing around in my brain and I couldn't sort of focus on any one thing. And I will say, for me, that was not, that wasn't an indicator of anything other than just really, feeling like everything was important, nothing was important, couldn't really make heads or tails about what it was that was going to benefit most from my attention. And, feeling like that, that sort of disconnection about anything that I was doing, making a difference, and sort of feeling that wheel spinning, I think is a lot of what people are often feeling when they're burned out. And I think I also see burnout presenting a lot with working moms who are feeling like they're giving everything to either their job or their kids, or only their job and their kids and not themselves. And so I think it's when you really, in those instances when those women are realizing that, they're not carving out anything special for themselves anytime, and when they're sort of maybe mad at the self-care industry and they're to being told that they need to be taking care of themselves, and they're like, I don't have time for that. I think that those are often signs that somebody's, burned out, they're frustrated, and they're not really sure what to do next, to kind of untangle those
Yeah.
feelings.
So how would you approach, someone who comes to you like that just says, look, my sister-in-law told me to call you, and I don't think I can do this because I have zero time. I don't have the resources. So, what would you say to someone who was like, I don't have time. I don't have time for self-care.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's, I mean, it's such um, a common, element that people are often saying. And I think that I honestly think that, um, some of that comes to like, what is somebody actually thinking of as self-care? Is it like, you got to go get your nails done, got to go take a, bubble bath or whatnot? And I think that there's so much more to taking care of yourself. And a lot of it comes to you know, what is something that is missing in that person's life that really lights them up. So, for example, I think, if there's someone who says, I used to be a whole lot more creative a long time ago or before I had kids or something like that, then it might be, how could you incorporate just like 10 minutes of doodling some evening or afternoon or during a meeting or after a meeting or whatever it might be, and what kind of sparks from something like that. Or if it's someone who says, I used to really enjoy cooking and now I just can't stand it because, everybody in my house hates what I cook. So I just don't bother anymore. Well, could you cook just for yourself? Could you come up with something that is, incredibly exotic, that brings you a lot of joy, that allows you to, flex some creative muscles in your kitchen, and it's just for you. So I think that there's a lot more variety that can kind of come into self-care that might be sort of, something that is more achievable to fit into a daily routine than feeling like, I've got to schedule this, massage once a week and I'm never going to be able to fit that in because really it's like a 2.5 hour ordeal and, it's going to cost me all this money. That there's a lot of more simple strategies to be able to incorporating some things like that. I think also some of what I notice when I'm thinking about burnout are even really small elements that might be sort of adding to burnout. I think a lot, one of the things for me that I didn't realize early on that was contributing to my burnout were notifications on my Apple Watch. That I was getting constant notifications from my email and from all kinds of other sort of sources on my Apple Watch. And that every time that vibration was happening, that I was feeling like I was sort of off into another tailspin. And recognizing that my job I was not being judged on my job by how much my body reacted to an email hitting my Apple Watch, but it was really about the response itself, whatever thoughtful response I was providing to, the notification that I was getting, right? And so sometimes I think it's about, breaking down some really small adjustments and identifying something that feels almost like low-hanging fruit. Now that, I will tell you, was a very big shift for me. To be able to remove some of those notifications from my Apple Watch felt like I was moving an entire mountain. Is it? No. When I tell you the story now, it's like, well, that seems like a really silly thing, but it was about kind of coming to that shift mindset of saying, this is something very, really small. It can be changed back, right? That was not like a permanent solution. Granted, I have not gone back. I'm quite happy with where I am at this point. And I think that there was a lot of recognition that had to sort of go into that process. And so that was, one of the really sort of main changes that I made in the very early days of how do I break down this burnout for myself. And I think that that's what I would would want to look to for anybody. Is like, what is that sort of small shift you can make for yourself?
Ah, I love that. I love the idea of identifying the things that bring you joy, things that maybe you used to do that you aren't doing anymore. I mean, I think that that's such a simple thing because it's kind of like I think it's easier for our brains to be like, well, I used to do that, therefore that is more probable. Whether than rather than being like, I've always wanted to take a pottery class, like I've never done it before, and I feel like that's a larger hurdle to get
Yes.
over than I used to journal every day. And one thing that I started doing, and this was from my coach, I think I have a coach too, is I used to love journaling and writing, and so I created these little totes. They're actually shower totes that my daughters and I each have our own totes, which has a notebook and pens and pencils and crayons and art supplies. And so I set a timer, and so in the evenings between dinner and bed, because that's always a weird time, you're like, well, what do we do?
Mm-hmm.
It's not long enough for this, and it's too short for that. So we'll set a timer based on how much time we have, maybe 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. Set the timer on my phone, and we are sit in silence, and we each write in our book. And then at the end, we share what we want.
Amazing.
And so I get to do my journaling. They can't read yet. So then I'll draw a little picture at the end and it'll be like, here's a picture of something. But really, that's my like download time. And then they have a chance to have sort of quiet, creative time too. So because I think, as mothers, we want to teach our children
Mm-hmm.
these skills as well, because we don't want them to make, at least I don't want my girls to make the same mistakes I did of
Yep.
just getting too invested in my work and
Yep.
then putting myself second.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. No, and to model that behavior, in addition to building the community with your daughters in that way is so incredibly special. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I was like, I told my coach, I was like, thank you. This has been great. So yeah. And I know for you, you work, your work is mostly as a coach. I know you do workshops with
Mhm.
larger groups, but you mostly work one-on-one. And I'm guessing because it's probably nice, like my example, where you can actually help people identify very specific things, right?
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
That
Yeah. No, it's really important to be able to, I mean, because everybody's coming with their own, what brought them to this place to, need a coach. And then certainly, I really believe that, um, everybody sort of has their own toolkit and it's really us just together sort of discovering what's in it and what's available to them.
I love that. Yeah. And I think it's so important because I mean, I think there are things, and I'm hoping that you can share with us some general things too,
Mhm.
because obviously this is a list, this is going to go out to many people. Um, but, ideally you would work one-on-one, but do you have, are there any tips and strategies? I know I was thinking of like preventative strategies for burnout, and then maybe restorative or like active strategies for when you're in burnout. So maybe you could share with our listeners, how do we prevent this, or what are things that you tips for preventing people from getting into this state or this tailspin?
I love it. So I call it my burnout preparedness toolkit because I believe that, especially leaders, working moms, caregivers, that we are all really on a journey that we need to prepare for burnout. That burnout is more of a matter of when, not if. And that these tools are really important to have in place sort of before burnout happens. But they're also really the same tools that someone could use to overcome burnout. And there's kind of a wide variety that I have because I think that they don't all work for every person and they don't all work for every situation, because sometimes you have to sort of break down some of the elements of burnout as you're kind of going through the process. And I think that, the sort of very first element, and we talked a bit before about how, um, outside stressors then create a stress response in the body, and that sort of winds up in the body, and that you are able to release those stress cycles. And really, one of the ways to release them is through a physical release. So, obviously, we all know that we're told that we should be exercising a certain number of minutes and days per week. And I like to sort of approach that physical release, those minutes of exercise, really sort of mindfully approaching that I am trying to unwind stress cycles. I'm not just trying to get like six-pack abs and really, toned arms, but that I'm actually trying to um, unwind the stressors that have created these stress cycles in my body, and that at the end of this particular amount of time that I'm working on this physical release, that I should hopefully feel a little bit more present and a little bit less stressed.
Mm.
And that's sort of one way. And then we've talked a lot about you know creative release. So whether that's through journaling, I think that there's a lot of magic in sort of just doodling and in just letting your mind wander with some markers or a pen and a journal, and allowing that whatever kind of comes up. And I have a woman, a college roommate of mine, who is a creative coach, and she's created what she calls Doodle-Shops. And they're really amazing because it's a way of doing exactly what you're doing with your daughters, actually, is allowing some doodling to happen and then sharing to happen after that. And I think that that leads into another point for me, which is to really find and build some community.
Mm.
I think especially we saw during the pandemic that isolation just further added to the stressors that we were encountering. And so in whatever ways we're able to add and build community around us to be able to sort of, release some of the energy, I think is really, really important. Um, and I'll just give you one more. Um, Actually, I'll give you two more, my two favorite. So I think that for us, for especially I think as moms, we're often trying to achieve a certain sort of level, right? We have like an idea of what we think of as a perfect mom. And I think we're trying to do so many things at one time. But I like the concept of, sort of approaching things with your highest and best self. So rather than saying, I'm going to be good at all of these things, that you look at your unique gifts and skills and say, I'm going to utilize these in this particular way. And that the other things that maybe I'm not quite so good at, I'm not going to try to excel in those areas if they're not, like we talked about, if they're not bringing me joy, and if they're really not something that's going to be helping me in that way. So that if you are sort of bringing your best, unique, highest and best self qualities and gifts to a particular situation, then celebrate that and enjoy that. And then we also talked about before, sort of my journey to burnout, overcoming burnout for myself was to learn something new, was that, going through all of these steps of coaching and whatnot. And so I think that there's just so much value in the sort of additive process of learning something that you didn't know, but that you've always been interested in or that you want to explore. And so coming at that, where we always get to be sort of educated in some way, I think brings a lot of enjoyment, because, often I think about someone who's feeling like they're just doing the same thing over and over again. And maybe they're really good at their job, but that job isn't necessarily bringing them joy anymore. They're just sort of, what I like to say, is moving paper from one side of their desk to the other. The thought about going and learning something new is just, it's breaking up their thinking, the way that they're approaching problems or, other elements in their life. So that's one that I like to share.
Those are great. Yeah, I could see how those would be really helpful. Really everyone could take something from each of those areas and apply it. And this idea of the additive process that you said, I use this a lot when I do my coaching with herbal medicine, with diet, is that it's easier to tell someone to add a food than to take away a food. But what happens as a result is when you add something new, something old tends to fall away. Right? Because
Yep.
there are so many hours in a day, and there is only so much attention you can have, that if you add something you really love, or if you add a food that has very high nutrient value,
Yep.
or you add more water, like the candy snacks will, like other things that don't feel as good will just sort of naturally fall to the side.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
So what about some strategies for recovering from or for managing burnout?
Yeah. So I think that strategies for recovering from burnout, I mean, I think that in a lot of ways, it's about trying to keep things really simple. That, I think if I'm talking to someone about, where to start with burnout, like a long list of, really big things that they need to accomplish is just going to continue to add to the list of things they already feel like they're not getting done. One of the sort of lowest hanging fruit that I like to think about, that I used a lot, was to complete something start to finish. For me, that was cooking. That was something I was especially doing during the pandemic. I felt like I was being interrupted like every 10 seconds, between work, between two kids, between my husband, between everybody being home, between news alerts and all of those sorts of things. So for me, I knew that I had to get dinner on the table, and I used that as a source of joy, that I was able to do something start to finish. And I think that there's a lot of power in that. Now, fully recognize that by talking about cooking, I might actually be adding to somebody's list of things that they really hate, right? The point is about finding something that brings you some joy, that that you're going to be able to actually finish, and that sort of no amount of interruptions is going to keep you from finishing it, because it needs to be finished. And so that's why I use that example about cooking something.
Yeah, that's a great one. And yeah, I do think there's that sense of accomplishment because I think part of, I call it fragged out. Like that's my word for overwhelm is like,
I love
I'll
that.
say to my husband, like, I'm starting to get a little fragged out. I need to go on a walk. Like, I just, I need to get some separation. And for me, it's nature. Like, that's my
Mhm.
happy place. So even 5 minutes, I'll go just
Yeah.
go out and pick weeds and getting my hands in the earth, the fresh air, the expansiveness of space and not having, I don't know if you could hear my daughter screaming. My sitter's down there. She got a boo boo. And I was like listening, like, here's me having to multitask. I'm like, okay, does this require me to stop the video and go downstairs? Like,
Yes.
you're always on alert. But when I'm outside and I'm like, there's this openness and this spaciousness where my nervous system just gets quiet. And so for me, it's like, yeah, do you ever do like timers? Like for me, sometimes I find I'm going to do this thing for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's like the finish is the time rather than the task. Cause like weeding is like, it never
Never
works.
ending. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that a timer is a great way to add kind of a finish for a task that feels ongoing. And I think that maybe if if you're looking at weeding, if it's like I'm just going to do this one little quadrant right here, and when this one quadrant is finished, then I might leave. And I think that there's especially something um like cooking or like weeding. Um, maybe it is folding laundry. I don't know. That one might be a little bit controversial, but there's some level of sort of mindfulness to know that this is going to be a start to finish process, and that there can be a little bit of flow, a little bit of sort of like meditative approach to that particular activity, to know that it's a way for it to be releasing, exactly as you're sort of saying, that when you're going outside, that like everything else kind of has to fade away, that you're there and that's your one focus. um, and that you know exactly what it is that you're planning on finishing, whether it's time, whether it's a specific area, something like that.
Yeah, and that's so small. That's such a doable thing to add into your day is to find a task. And yeah, even if it's something you're already doing, like cooking, or you're already washing the dishes. I love going to bed with an empty sink. Like
Mhm.
that brings me such joy. I know it might be like kind of weird to other people, but it's like, what are those things for each of us where it's like, when I finish this task, I feel so good. And
Yeah.
there's a sense of order in the universe when my sink is.
Well, and when you can show up the next morning ready to start the breakfast shuffle, that you know that you don't have to start by cleaning your dishes. Yeah.
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 So are there any other, kind of favorite tips or tricks, or stories that you have from other clients of things that have been very impactful?
um I think that I think we've been talking on such a wonderful positive note, and I think that that's really the sort of my best tip, I think, is really to find opportunities for play and fun. And I think that when someone is burned out, that probably feels like the farthest thing that they're able to do. But I think that in as many small moments as possible, that a playfulness can come out, that some fun can be found, that I think that there's so much power in that. And that when it's really sort of incorporated in a more organic way, that I think that's really important. So I think about it a lot when I might be otherwise frustrated about a situation with my kids, for example, that if I make like a funny voice or I do something that I think is sort of silly, and that, if I saw another adult doing it, I'd probably just roll my eyes, and then they just, start breaking out in fits of laughter, that we're bringing sort of fun and some pleasure into a situation that might otherwise be challenging. And I think that we forget that in a lot of ways. And it doesn't have that situation doesn't have to just exist with my kids. And I think it's really important to think about, how could I invite some fun or some playfulness into this otherwise kind of tricky situation.
Yeah, yeah. And it's that modeling again, isn't it? That modeling of this behavior
Yeah.
for, and in the workplace too. I mean, you've worked in some pretty high level high stress environments. And so, if you can bring a little humor, a little lightness, I'm sure that can change the energy. And I was just thinking too about, in the spiritual world and in the spiritual path that I follow, that my greatest teachers all have a sense of humor. There's like a humility and a sense of astonishment and wonder, curiosity and play that even in their elder years, they are able to embody. And, while in the moment of overwhelm and despair and frazzledness, that might feel like a long shot. I love your example of how even, in a moment of stress with your kids, it's a silly voice. It could just be something as simple as that can just change the energy. So I love that. Thank you. And
That's great.
so, as we bring our conversation to a close, I want to let people know how they can find you and in what capacity you're available. Do you have any workshops coming up or anything like that?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. I do have, so I have a website, pullthefocus.com, and I can also be found on LinkedIn and social media. I'm on Instagram, and you can find me as Michelle _ pull the focus or pull the focus coaching. Those are both my handles there. And also, as far as upcoming workshops, I'll have on my website later this week, I'm hosting a burnout preparedness training for working caregivers in late September. And so that's something, if you want to sort of go deeper in some of the things that we've talked about today, that will be happening in that workshop later in September, which I'm really excited about. And I do have a newsletter that I send out generally once a month. I'm taking a little hiatus over the summer, but that'll be back in the fall. So you can sign up
Excellent.
for my website there.
Wonderful. Yeah. And I'll include the links and all the, Instagram handles and everything. I'll include that in the description. So after you're watching this, please go over there, follow Michelle, sign up for her newsletter. If you're not subscribed to me, please click the subscribe button so that you can follow me. And I love to have guests like Michelle on and just weaving together how to, live a more present, conscious, and spiritual life. In the modern world, it's challenging. We need resources and we need a community, as Michelle pointed out. So we can be community members for you, and and also introduce you to other people in our network. So thank you so much, Michelle, for your time, for your expertise, and I look forward to hearing more from you and seeing more of the great work you're up to.
Thank you so much, Ashley. This has been such a pleasure. I love this conversation. So really, thank you so much for bringing me on.
My pleasure. All right, we'll talk soon.
Sounds good.
Thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you soon.